सिन्दूरारुणविग्रहा त्रिनयना माणिक्यमौली स्फुरत् तारानायकशेखरा स्मितमुखी मामीनवक्षोरुहा पाणिभ्यामलिपूर्णरत्नचषकम् रक्तोत्पलं बिभ्रतीं सौम्यां रत्नघटस्थरक्तचरणां ध्यायेत् परामम्बिकाम् सान्निपातिकज्वर सततज्वर विषमज्वर ग्रहनक्षत्रदोषाञ्चान्या हर हर काली सर सर गौरी क्रमधमविद्ये आले माले काले बन्धे भज भज विद्ये मख मख विद्ये नाशय नाशय पापम् हर हर दुःस्वप्नम् विध्वंसय विध्वंसय विघ्नविनाशिनि रजनी सन्ध्ये मुन्दुभिनादे मानस्तोषे मानसवेगे शङ्खिनी चक्रिणी वज्रिणी गदिनी शूलिनी अपमृत्युविनाशिनी विश्वेश्वरी द्राविडी केशवदैते पशुपति सहिते धीममर्दिनि धमनी कामिनी शबरी विराटी वाचक्री ॐ द्रं 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 ॐ द्रं गुरु गुरु
Namaste, dear friends. Welcome again to day 9, to the last session of day 9 of this global festival of yoga. It has been a very enriching journey so far, and we are very grateful to all of you for being co-travelers with us for all these 9 days. We still have another 3 weeks to go, and we look forward to your continued presence on these sessions, because without you, this sharing would not be as meaningful for all of us here. So do stay with us. We have today a very special session by Sri Raghu Anantanarayanji, and I have a co-anchor with me whom I would like to introduce, and he will then introduce Raghuji to you all. So I have Hari Prasad ji. Hari Prasad ji is a yoga entrepreneur. So if you've not heard that, this is the first time you'll hear this word. So he's a yoga entrepreneur with a fascinating background. He is a digital consultant and a storyteller as well. And he does professional tarot reading during his free time. So Hariji has founded the Yogashala in 2017 as a location independent center to spread the teachings of yoga in its authentic and holistic form. And that's what Indica Yoga is also all about. We are here to promote authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga experiences. And Yogashala is a platform where he combines his passions for travel, storytelling, yoga, and tarot reading. Hariji has taken corporate wellness workshops and yoga retreats across India, including in Uttarakashi, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Assam, Tripura. The list is very long, and he has also done workshops abroad. He's currently also pursuing his teacher training program in healing chants of Yajurveda from the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram in Chennai. And it's a very great pleasure to have him here because he is a student of Raghuji as well. So there can be no greater honor than a student introducing his teacher. So over to you, Hariji. Just before you take on, I'd just like to make a few announcements. So we will have, Raghuji will speak for about 40-45 minutes as usual. And we request you to please ask your questions in the Q&A box. Because if you're asking it in the chat, it can get lost. So please make sure you're asking your questions in the Q&A box. And another request is please let us know which part of the world you are from. So let us know the country, place, and put your name in there. And we'd be delighted to also let the rest of the world know how many participants we've got from different parts. So over to you, Hariji. Thank you very much. And Namaste, Raghuji. A very, very warm welcome to you on this show.
Thank you, Anuradha ji. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to give an introduction to my teacher and mentor, Sri Raghu Anantnarayanan. And so it's my pleasure to briefly state about Raghu here for those of you who do not know him. So Raghu is a direct disciple of the Yogacharya Sri T. Krishnamacharya, and he's learned yoga and Yoga Sutra under Krishnamacharya for over a decade. And he's also the co-founder of many organizations, including Sumedha's Academy for Human Context, Tavo Leadership Academy, and Ritambhara. So he has also been had long-term association with Jiddu Krishnamurti and learned with Professor Pulin Garg of IIM Ahmedabad. So Raghu has also worked a lot with organizations in the space of organizational development, leadership trainings, and also applied yoga and Yoga Sutras in a very experiential way. I think that is something that has really appealed to people like me who made a shift from corporate space to take on yoga, because I got really inspired and motivated by the way Yoga Sutra and Antaranga Yoga, especially the topic for today's talk is also yoga for inner transformation. So Raghu has really brought in Yoga Sutras, Idihasa Purana traditions of India, theater, arts, and created a blend where we can experience them in a very practical, experiential way, in a way that is self-reflective and helps us discover deeper aspects of our own psyche and mind. And for me personally, I should mention this since today's topic is that of inner transformation. I got associated with Ritambhara and through programs designed by Raghu, Saptasura and Mahabharata Immersion, where we really bring together these aspects of Yoga Sutra, Antaranga Yoga, and Idihasa Purana traditions in a very experiential and deeply powerful way. And I had the opportunity to attend this program at a juncture where I was in a very critical phase of my life and really trying to figure out what is the next right step for me. And attending these programs really helped me to experience the thresholds that I was in at that moment in a very deeper, self-reflective manner, and in a way where I could really get in touch with and discover a path forward. So I'm deeply grateful to Raghu for really bringing out all these valuable learnings and passing on to us, and also helping us take it forward in a way where it is deeply fulfilling for ourselves and for others. So Raghu, I would like to invite you to this talk, the Yoga of Inner Transformation. And it's my privilege to welcome you to this session of the festival.
Thank you. Namaste. Before I start, I'd just like to do a small pranam to my teachers. Um, Om Shri Krishna Vagishayatishwarabhyam Samprapta Chakrangana Bhashya Saram Shri Nutnarangendra Yatau Samarpitasvam Shri Krishna Maryam Guru Varyamide Virodhe Kartike Mase Shatatara Kritodayam Yogacharyam Krishna Maryam Guruvaryam Aham Bhaje. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Thank you very much, Anuradha ji and Hari ji. It's indeed quite a pleasure, and I must also say a little overwhelming to reach out to such a wide audience through this medium. And this is a medium all of us are starting to get more and more familiar with. So it's also the first time I'll be talking to so many people by just looking into my screen. See, and I'm used to having small groups of people, intimate groups, a lot of dialogue, and most of my programs, if you can call them that, immersions, are something like 1 week long, very intense dialogues. So let me give this a shot and see how far I'm able to get across, right? So it's a great challenge for me. I'm going to have a little bit of fun while I'm doing this. So the area that I'm supposed to talk about and what I've been focusing on is what is referred to in the Yoga Sutra as the Antaranga Sadhana. Now, what is Antaranga Sadhana? There are 3 parts of yoga defined in the Yoga Sutra. There's one part which is defined as Bahiranga Yoga. Now, the word Bahiranga means external faculties. And there's a very interesting way in which yoga describes what is Bahiranga. Whatever is Mano Gocharam, which means any aspect of my practice that I can grasp with my senses and with my manas, which is the 11th indriya, is called Bahiranga Sadhana. What is in Antaranga Sadhana are those aspects which are only Buddhi Gochara, which means they are much more subtle and you cannot really grasp them with the senses and with the thinking mind like you can aspects like asana, pranayama, yama and niyama. And then there is another even more deep area called Parama Antaranga Sadhana, which in a sense goes even deeper than what is Buddhi Gochara or subtle grasp. And this is the area of Nirbija Samadhi and higher reaches of deep Samadhi states. Why is this Antaranga Sadhana important? What yoga says is that when a person comes to yoga, it is always through a kind of an awakening that I'm living in bhoga, I'm experiencing dukkha, and I need to turn inward. Now, if this shift does not happen, the person doesn't enter the practice or the path of yoga. And you can still do asana and pranayama. It will not be the same as a yoga sadhana. So that's the first shift that one has to make, where you start taking the question of dukkha and bhoga seriously, and you start questioning, how do I engage with the world? Bhoga means I'm consuming the world and the world is consuming me. And dukkha means my own space, my life space and my inner space are feeling crushed in some way. They don't feel holistic. I don't experience an inner flow. So this shift, once it happens, the way in which one engages with asana and pranayama, the way in which one engages with all the yama and niyama, which is various forms of ethical practices. One set of practices which has to do with how I'm dealing with people outside of me, another set of practices with how I cleanse my own inner being. All of these take on a very different color. Yeah. One of the nicest ways of understanding much of what our culture talks about is through stories. And there are some very beautiful stories that illustrate entire processes of yoga. One of the most illustrative and beautiful stories is the one that has to do with a person called Vishwamitra. He was called Kaushika before he was called Vishwamitra, who's a great king who's made all kinds of external conquests. And in his travels, he comes across a very great rishi called Vasishta. And in the encounter with Vasishta, Vishwamitra discovers that he has been on the Bahiranga practices so far. He's made himself very powerful, but he has not turned inward at all. So the story goes on to talk about the encounter with Vasishta, which turns him around, and he then goes into a process of his own tapas. Now, the word tapas is often translated as austerities, which is not the way Krishnamacharya would look at it. Tapas is a way of ripening the self. So the part of my psyche and my own faculties that keep getting drawn to the outer world, into the world of bhoga, into the world of indulgence, into the world of consumption, has to be ripened. And in order to ripen this, one uses many forms of self-reflective practices. Because there is a certain heat in the mind, there's a certain light and a brightness in the mind. And when this light and heat and brightness shine on the entirety of my life, it enables me to have insights into what I'm doing. Yeah. So I was telling you that the first step is to understand that I'm living a life which is causing all kinds of suffering and distortion in my space. The first step, I say, what am I doing that is causing this? So that is what Vishwamitra does. In his fight with Vasishta, he comes across this insight saying, what am I doing? And then he goes on an inward path. And this inward path is a slow ripening of the self. So different parts of me which get attracted to the outside, which get drawn to the outside, drop away. And what is very interesting about this whole process is there's an analogy that is made with fruits that are not ripe. So when you pluck away a fruit from a tree when it's not ripe, it leaves a hurt in the tree, and the tree weeps actually. So the suggestion is that we don't look at ourselves in terms of good and bad, in terms of right and wrong, but actually watch how the movement of my psyche is happening. And through this watching and the ripening, things that are not conducive to the inner sadhana, to the inner path of yoga, fall away. I think this is a very beautiful concept, because if we don't understand this, we don't walk the middle path. We either start indulging or we start fighting with ourselves, and neither of these two will help us to gain insights into who we are. Now, one of the encounters of Vishwamitra illustrates this entire process of inner work of Antaranga Sadhana very, very beautifully, right? And this story goes like this. There is this king called Satyavrata, who unfortunately is not a very honest guy, though his name is Satyavrata. And one of the things that he wishes to do is he wishes to go to heaven, to go to Swarga in his own body without doing anything to transform himself. So he gets this bright idea that, I should go and talk to Vasishta. He's after all my Kula Guru. So let me go and ask Vasishta. So he goes up to Vasishta and says, I'd like to go to heaven and just send me to heaven in this body. So Vasishta, who's an extremely wise guru and a great rishi, tells him that is just not possible. So Satyavrata gets very upset and he starts playing tricks because he's a very tricky guy. So he goes and talks to Vasishta's sons and says, look, this is what your father said. Why don't you send me to heaven in my body as it is? And Vasishta's sons get very angry because instead of taking Vasishta's words and working with himself, he's trying to play tricks and trying to find shortcuts in order to get to a place which very clearly he cannot get to. So Satyavrata then goes to Vishwamitra and tries to kindle Vishwamitra, and unfortunately Vishwamitra gets pulled. He gets seduced by Satyavrata. He gets into the competitiveness with Vasishta and breaks his tapas, right? So this is very critical and very important. So when the inner seeds of certain kinds of involvement with the external world, certain hooks with the external world have not been worked through, it is possible for some external power, some external force to keep pulling you back into a world of dukkha and entanglement and consumption and bhoga. So Vishwamitra turns around and says, okay, I'll send you to heaven, and does a yajna and sends Satyavrata towards Swarga, which is heaven. But the Devas say, sorry, you cannot come here without having transformed yourself. So Satyavrata gets very angry. He shouts to Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra says, stop. So Satyavrata stops in between heaven and earth upside down. And then Vishwamitra, using his power, creates a heaven around Trishanku and around Satyavrata. And then he is called Trishanku because he's neither here nor there. He's hanging upside down. And this whole Swarga is called Trishanku Swarga. Now, the story is very beautiful because it illustrates several extremely subtle and interesting ideas from the Yoga Sutra. Yeah. Now, one of the critical ideas in Yoga Sutra is called avidya. So, Trishanku, standing upside down, represents this whole confusion in our mind about many of the things we experience in the world. We experience time, we experience external realities, we have internal realities, and we have an experience of life itself. Now, ordinarily, we have an idea of what is permanence, what's the nature of the world, what is good for us, where life is coming from, and so on. And many of these are inaccurate perceptions. So we create a world where we feel that if I do this or that, I'll be able to get out of dukkha. I'll be able to get out of my suffering. But the reality is that because I'm like Trishanku, upside down, and I've got the fundamental ideas about the world and about myself incorrect, I keep on doing things that get me more and more and more entangled. So Trishanku is there all alone in a Swarga of his own, and everything he acquires, everything we acquire and place in our spaces, hoping that this will end our dukkha, things that we do, hoping that somehow we will have a life that is completely beautiful, are all actions which are very much like Trishanku. We live in a space of our own, a little lonely. We think that it is beautiful and safe, and it's like Swarga, but it only makes us more and more lonely, more and more anxious, until we start to understand that this whole process of engaging with the world that the way I do, the way I'm creating my space is actually the source of dukkha. Yeah, so this whole story of Vishwamitra and Trishanku shows us this particular game that we play with ourselves. There's a part of ourselves which is capable of deep reflection. It's capable of seeing the truth. It's capable of having insights. There's also another part that is like Trishanku, which can get drawn to the outside, drawn to things like saying, you know, I wish for this. Like it's a very childish thing to say that I wish to go to heaven without doing anything. And then this part of me, the Vishwamitra part of me, gets drawn towards these childish desires, if you can say that, and loses the path. So Antaranga Sadhana is this whole dialogue between this part of me which is intense, which is beautiful, which is capable of deep reflection, and the other part that keeps getting pulled, right? And you'll find this very beautiful juxtaposition of those parts of me which are integrated, which are pulling towards the beautiful, pulling towards Ananda, and those that are not. So the first story that was written by Bharata, for instance, in Natya Shastra is about the Samudra Manthan. So Vishwamitra is like the sons of Aditi, the mind which has got no divisions. These are the Devas. And Trishanku is like the children of Diti, the mind with divisions. And these two are in some kind of a dialogue and a discourse. And the more I discover how to feed those parts of me which are like Vishwamitra, I move deeper and deeper inward. So the moment Vishwamitra discovers for himself that he's made a mistake, this entire part of him, the part of him that is holding envy, the part of him that's holding competitiveness, falls away. It's like a ripened fruit that has fallen away. And his tapasya can move forward. His inner work can move forward. Yeah. So this is the story of Antaranga Sadhana. And there are about 60 or 70 sutras in the Yoga Sutra that talk to you about how this process happens. And to me, the key sutra in this entire process comes in the second chapter. It says, Dhyana heyaha tadvrittayaha. Now, why this is such a beautiful sutra is because it talks about the ability of the mind to meditate, to really find the measure of oneself. You know, dhyana, the word dhyana is best translated into two English words. Both of them apply equally. One is meditation. And the word meditation comes from the word measurement, medicine, measurement, and all from the same root. So dhyana is the process of getting a true measure of oneself. So when Vishwamitra examines his mind and says, hey, this is why I got caught with Trishanku's invitation, he is in dhyana, right? The other meaning of the word dhyana is contemplation, which comes from the word temple. And temple is a space in which to observe. And there are many, Tirumular and other people have talked about how this one's body itself is a temple and so on. So contemplation is the ability to look inward, to be self-reflective. So dhyana actually is that process where I stay within, look inward from a place which is sacred, which is beautiful, and truly get a measure of who I am. Truly get a measure of what are the processes that are acting through me. What am I doing? How am I getting entangled with the world? What is it that I'm doing to get disentangled? And how do I discover beauty inside me? How do I discover integration in myself? How do I gather all my forces together into myself and then let this flower? Yeah. And when one gets in touch with this, one starts understanding the word swadharma. What is it that I have been gifted with in my life? And how can this part that has been gifted to me be brought to its fruition? How can this part be made to flower, made to flow in the most dharmic, in the most helpful way in the world? Now that, in short, is the whole story of Antaranga Sadhana. Yeah, I'm also reminded at this point of a very beautiful way in which Buddha and the Dhammapada speaks about the same thing. I'm just going to paraphrase this to you. Buddha speaks about the fact that all human beings experience pain, experience hurt, and experience sorrow. Then he goes on to say that when people experience pain and sorrow and hurt, they go seeking refuges. And then he says that this whole process of going and seeking refuges keeps increasing the sorrow, keeps getting a person entangled in the sorrow and in the whole wheel of samsara. That's what is samsara, the world that's going round and round. I keep recreating this world of entanglement, and it makes me more and more filled with dukkha. This is exactly what Trishanku is doing. And then he says that human beings look for 4 refuges. They look for refuges in other men. They look for refuges in material possessions. They look for refuges in knowledge. And they look for refuges in the idea of God. And then he goes on to say that the first 2 refuges are false, and the falsity of these refuges you can discover fairly easily when you examine them in your own life. Because other people can never take you out of sorrow, and no amount of material possession will ever take you out of sorrow. But he goes on to say that the nature of a belief in knowledge and the nature of a belief in God, because they are founded on fear, because they are founded on unquestioned and unexamined beliefs, create great destruction and great violence before man discovers that these are not true refuges. And then he says, it's only when a person stops looking for these refuges and starts encountering his own dukkha, his own sorrow directly, that he takes the first step to ending his sorrow. So this process of directly encountering one's life, directly encountering how one recreates and recreates one's own reality of the world, like Trishanku is doing, is the first point when you turn around from bhoga turn around from just, you know, some external practices into truly working with your antaranga. And as you work with your antaranga, you come to the point where you're not feeding these processes anymore. That is called pratyahara. So the ahara, the feeding that I give, like Vishwamitra is feeding his own ego, he's feeding his own envy and jealousy, that process ends. So when this ends, then that energy of mine is going to nurture a whole different part of me. This process is very, very critical, because without this, my psyche is not capable of deep attention. My psyche is not capable of going into various levels of ananda. It's not capable of going into various levels of samadhi. And it's, I cannot stop reinforcing that this part of yoga is very critical. And without this, it's only Bahiranga. And if a person has not gone through this transformation, what they speak about as Parama Antaranga is largely Vikalpa, according to Krishnamacharya. Yeah. So this is as much as I can say by just looking at my face in this box. So I'd be very happy at this point to have questions, to have some reflections and so on. And that will enable me to respond to whatever is relevant for people who are listening to us.
Thank you, Rakhu. Yes, actually, there have been quite a lot of comments coming in, and a lot of them appreciating how the Trishanku story resonated with and how they could connect to the explanations.
Thanks.
There are a few
Nice.
questions here. I think the first question is from Aditya, and
Yeah.
this is, you have elaborated on this, but he's asking, can you share a little bit more about what is the middle path that you're referring to, that you referred at the start of the talk?
Okay. See, this is something that comes up in Bhagavad Gita also. When discussing the word tapas, see, very often the word tapas, I think it's because Amar Chitra Katha and so many other stereotyping of tapas will show one yogi standing on one leg forever and things like this, right? This is a very, hyperbole. It's a very stereotypical idea of tapas, which is not really the right way of looking at tapas. So one of the very beautiful analogies given to understand the word tapas is to say that me and my body and my psyche and so on is like forming a pot. Right? So through my actions, I shape myself, I shape my body, I shape my breath, I shape my mind, I shape my emotions, and so on. So this is compared to shaping a pot. Now, as you're shaping the pot, you come to a point when you feel that the shape is quite okay, and then you have to heat it. Now, if I underheat it, the pot will never be complete. It will just fall away. It can never do what it's ought to do. It can never hold water, or it can't be used for cooking, nothing. It'll just lose its shape very, very soon. If I overheat it, it'll become very brittle and it'll break. So tapas is compared to this process of heating in a way that I become exactly right, so that I can respond to the world beautifully. I can respond exactly the way the environment challenges me. Yeah, the other analogy given is of a veena. So if I over tighten the veena string, the moment I try to pluck it, it'll break. Yeah. If I don't tune it enough, and if I under tune it, it'll never make the right sound. So tapas is the process of that can be understood through these analogies of ripening, of tuning, of heating just right, and so on.
Thank you, Raghu. That's a beautiful explanation. The next question is, Namaste, sir. This is from Durai Raj. We would like to hear from you one or two experiences about your Guru, Sri Krishnamacharya and Deshikachar, something that you are very memorable for you.
This is tough, yeah, because there are so many memories and so many beautiful recollections. So let me try, na? Yeah, I think I'll. The one that comes to my mind is a very interesting story. So I'll tell you that and hope that communicates. This happened during, just before one of our classes with him. There was a news in the papers of this astronaut, I think Armstrong or somebody, having gone to the moon and put his foot on the moon, and there was this photograph of the foot in the moon. So when he came to class, before he started the class, he had a very mischievous look on his face. And he said, I'd like all of you people, the 3 or 4 of us who were sitting, Deshikachar was also with me there. He said, look, you people have to know that the Chandra that I pray to and the Chandra that this fellow has put his foot on are not the same. Okay, and I think this captured reality so beautifully. It's not as though Krishnamacharya didn't understand science, right? It's not as though he didn't read and so on. He was quite well informed about many things. But what he was trying to tell us was that there's a great deal of difference between understanding the world in a way that is very tangible. You know, this entire scientific mode of only what is visible, only what is measurable is true, and so on. And the whole mystic inner way of understanding your own universe and understanding your world. And he was actually cautioning us to say, don't confuse the two. Because I think one of the big challenges of all of us in our generation especially is this confusion between what is science and what is mysticism, what is Western, what is Indian, and so on. And there are many other instances where he's talked about it in different ways. But fundamentally, when you really internalize the Indian way of looking at it, like Sankhya, for example, and then you look at Vaiseshika, the Sankhya, Vaiseshika ways of looking at the world can very easily help you to understand science, because they're not against science at all. Because Vaiseshika talks about atomic particles. Yoga talks about kshana, the first element of time, as the movement of a subatomic particle, and so on. So there are many beautifully aesthetically articulated scientific ideas in Indian thought. But if you get stuck with a scientific idea saying, prove this to me, prove that to me, only what is tangible is right, what is not tangible and what is mystical is somehow not right, you lose your path. So to me, this little story of Krishnamacharya was a very, very important, very beautiful reminder of how to anchor myself in what is Indian, the importance of understanding the world from an Indic perspective, and then grasping the entire movement of man today from a perspective which is grounded in Indian thought. Yeah. With Deshikachar, there have been so many stories, because at one point, while he was a teacher, he was also a very good friend, and so on. So, maybe just the initial meetings with him, the way he would encourage each of us. Now, I had only been studying with him for a year or so when he said, go and teach. And I had to go and teach people who are dancers, right? And a dancer can do asanas that I cannot do. So the way in which he encouraged the teaching and said, look, your teaching and what you transfer in the teaching is what is important. Don't get confused by these kind of external things, like their asana capability or not, and so on. And there's so many instances where he was so gracious, the way he would accept mistakes that we made, turn around a mistake into a learning opportunity, and so on. Yeah. Now that I can go on for hours, but we won't do that now.
Thank you, Raghu. In fact, we are having so many questions, so I'm having to kind of go through and we can choose few which are commonly coming up. So few would like to know, Mehak, Vibhuti, can you share a bit more about how can we engage with our dukkha directly? Like there are emotions like jealousy, hatred, anger. How does one do it?
See, there's a whole part of yoga. The second chapter starts with tapas, swadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana. So I'm focusing on the swadhyaya part. Yeah. To me, the most beautiful way of dealing with this inner reality and being able to look at it is the Mahabharata. That's why I've gone into working with the Mahabharata as a way of working with oneself. Yeah, every story, the characters of the Mahabharata are just so beautifully crafted. It's just a master story. So for every aspect of the self, you have a story, a situation in which a person can either go the Trishanku way or you can go the Vishwamitra way. Yeah. So let's take a simple, very hopefully a common example like Bhima. Now the capabilities of Bhima and the capabilities of Duryodhana are exactly the same. They're both great Gadadharis. Both of them have studied with Balarama. And how do you differentiate the two? So if I don't look at Bhima as an external figure, if I don't look at him as the stereotype, now the Bollywood stereotype of Bhima is Dara Singh. So I stayed away from all these stereotypes. And if I go inward, then there are parts of me which are like Bhima, very courageous, capable of being angry at the right time, capable of using my power to do things. That part of me, which I'm calling the archetypal form of Bhima, is there in every one of us. And there is a very nice point that is described in the Mahabharata, where during one of the teachings, when Drona is teaching the two children, Bhima does something much better than Duryodhana, and he's praised. So jealousy enters Duryodhana's heart. And the moment envy and jealousy enters his heart, it takes hold, and he starts using his power in ways that slowly become destructive. Right? So if you examine these stories in Mahabharata, you can very easily reflect back on yourself and understand what it is that I'm doing. Now, it's not possible to do it just through stories or whatever. So in our program, we use a lot of other processes. We use dance, we use theater, we use so many other ways so that I can viscerally experience it and touch it. It's not an intellectual thing. Okay. These things, like Indian idea of the self, is not like the Western body, mind, this, that, and the other. It's all integrated. It's all interdependent. So it has to be a visceral insight and a visceral way of working with it. And all our dance and music and storytelling and everything in the Indian context is actually a mirror. It's a way for you to get into Swadhyaya. And they're not distinct and different. So to me, Mahabharata is the most brilliant psychology book ever written. Every aspect of man, every situation is there. If you read it and you reflect off it, it just illustrates to you who you are. So one doesn't read the Mahabharata, like a hero story. One has to read the Mahabharata and say, how am I like Bhima? How am I like Duryodhana, and so on. So that is the way you move inward.
Very, very apt, Raghu. And I could also share this from
Yeah,
my
please.
experience of working, learning under Raghu and being part of many of Ritambara programs where we really engage with Mahabharata and Antaranga Yoga at different levels. It's an exploratory level, at an immersive level. It's deeply transformative. And I think there is very little we can convey through words because it's all so experiential.
Yeah, and
So,
it's great
yeah.
fun. Great
Yes,
fun.
great fun also, correct. So I think on the similar line, the next, I'm combining a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
There are many people who are asking, what is the first step that I can take in the path of Antaranga, and how important is a teacher as I take this step?
Ah.
Is there a teacher very important? And when I face my emotions and bad habits, are there some basic practices I can put in place to kind of safeguard myself? So,
Okay. See the you know let me. I'm just reminded of a story. I don't know how else to talk about it to a large audience, because these are very personal questions, and we'll have to look at each person and say, what is it in you that is pulling you here, pulling you there? And suggestions cannot be generic. They have to be personal, and that's why you need a good guru or a teacher or an acharya, so that these generic ideas are converted into specific teachings that are meaningful to you. Yeah, but the story that I'm going to tell you is a very simple story. It's a very beautifully illustrative story. It's again got to do with this, this theme of saying what is external knowledge, what is internal knowledge, and so on. So this part of the Upanishad starts with the Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanat Kumara, the four wise men who go to a teacher and say, teach us what is truth. They go to Brahma and say, I've studied mathematics, I've studied Vyakarana, I've studied all of these things. But then they end up saying, Shokasya param tarayat vidya. I've not crossed the ocean of sorrow. So then there is a whole teaching where the story of Indra and Virochana comes up. It's a very beautiful story. So Indra and Virochana go up to Brahma and say, please teach us what is the truth. So Brahma says, go and do tapas. So 7 years or 11 years, I don't remember exactly. So they go and do that tapas and come back, and Brahma gives them a mirror. So both of them take this mirror. They're very happy that their father Brahma has given them this thing. So they're coming down the hill. And as they're coming down the hill, Virochana, who's the Asuric king, is very happy. He says, I'm seeing my mirror. This is the face. I just have to make myself beautiful, more powerful. I'll be happy, and so on. While Indira is walking down, he looks at the mirror and says, there's something wrong. When I look at it in the morning, I look in one way. When I look at it in the evening, it looks different. Tomorrow, I might be looking different. I haven't got the truth. So as they get to the bottom of the hill, Virochana rushes to his people and says, I found the truth. The truth is what you see in the mirror as your face. While Indra goes all the way back and says, this is not the whole thing. Yeah. This point of turn, the point at which Indra turns back and says, hey, there's something wrong. And also juxtapose it with the initial part of the story, which says that the starting point is to understand that the Bahiranga learning, the Apara Vidya, the Vidya that is of the world, like Krishnamacharya's story of the moon, yeah, that learning can only take you this far. It cannot take you further. And when you go inward, all meanings are only from within myself. See, I talked about those things that can be grasped with the manas or the indriyas. Those things can be demonstrated. In English, it is called denotative. So if you don't know what is a cricket ball, I can show you a cricket ball, right? Whereas what is called buddhi gochara, the inner things cannot be shown like this. They're called the connotative. They have to be understood through deep meditation. So if the question never arises, yeah, saying, is this knowledge enough or not? Are the meanings that I'm giving to the world meaningful or not? So it goes back to Trishanku's story. So here is Virochana who is making a wrong meaning. Now, unless a meditative process starts and I start questioning my own meanings of myself and of the world, I cannot start this Antaranga journey. So then Indra goes back up, and over a long period of time, he goes again, meditates, and he's taught what is Dahara Vidya. What is the understanding of that which is deep within me, the source of life, the source of all intelligence, the consciousness supreme, and so on. And this process requires a teacher. See, one of the important things is that when you read things, now today's world, reading and writing and stuff that is published has become very important, right? I'd just like to warn, a piece of warning on this, now, like a user manual thing saying this is a warning, statutory warning. When I read, what I do is like Virochana, I'm just reflecting my own face of the reading, because the world of the connotative is just my meaning of the world with no external reference. Now, when I speak to a teacher and have a dialogue with the teacher, which you could sit with Deshikacharya and you could dialogue with him. This is the way I'm understanding the world. This is what is happening to me. This is the way I'm understanding a certain word in the Yoga Sutra. Now, the live dialogue really expands your universe, right? Because I cannot then look at it from my own meaning frame. I have to confront a whole different way of looking at the same word. And I also believe that in the old Rishi tradition and in the Gurukulas and ashramas, there was a lot of dialogue going on. Because if you look at any Upanishad, it's a very small thing. It's about 100 lines. The whole of Yoga Sutra is 195 statements. Now, you don't sit with a teacher for 10 years, 15 years, 12 years to come up with just 12 statements, right? Or 15 statements or 100 statements. There's a whole lot of dialogue that's going on. And what is captured finally are like the key formulae, the formulaic statements. And one of the things that Deshikacharya has said, which is extremely important to keep in mind, is if you have to understand the Yoga Sutra, you have to turn every sutra into a question. So let's say a yama, ahimsa. You have to turn it into a question and say, do I really understand ahimsa? What does ahimsa mean to me? Which actions of mine are really ahimsatmik, and so on. So the moment I turn it into a question and an inquiry, it becomes an antaranga sadhana. If I just hold it as an injunction, it is a control process, which is useful, but that is not antaranga yoga.
Thanks, Rakhu. I hope that gave an idea of how to take the first steps. I think more than this, you're also welcome to join our Antaranga Yoga process, which will give an actual experiential understanding. One last question before we wind up, and I'm going to connect this to Ritambara. The question is from Aditya. One of the 4 refuges that you mentioned is finding refuge in other people. But we also talk about the contribution of a community or a collective in one's journey to find their meaning. So I'm just adding my own bit to that. So Ritambara is something that you co-founded as a community of sacred activists to explore Antaranga Yoga. So how can you relate your experience of working with this Antaranga Yoga processes and at the same time creating a collective? If you could share in that context.
See, there are 2 parts to this. One is that a guru is different from a father and a mother. So that's very clear in the Upanishads also. when a person has not worked through their issues of father, mother, and all that, they convert the teacher into a parental figure. And then dependencies start. You cannot learn the truth, you cannot go into Antaranga Sadhana if there is a relationship of dependency with your teacher. There has to be respect, there has to be fondness, and all of that, but there cannot be dependency. So in my understanding, what the Buddha is talking about is dependency on a person. Yeah. So when he says this person has become a refuge, the way I understand it is I'm assuming that just because I've gone to so and so, my dukkha is going to be ended by this person in some way. Right? As a child, you expect your life to be held in a certain way by your parents. So you transfer this kind of a refuge idea. You're actually dependent when you're a child. You need this protection. But later, you cannot be depending on that protection, because then you become, your inner world is not ripening, it's not growing, it's not maturing. So your relationship with the teacher and your relationship with co-learners has to have this respectful, dialogic, confrontative, without becoming conflictual kind of a relationship. Only then your mind is going to be challenged, you're going to grow. Yeah, otherwise you will be stunted. And that is a great difficulty, because if you get dependent on a teacher, it's good for the teacher in some way if the teacher doesn't watch out. So I have to work as much as everybody else to make sure that I stay with this space. I don't allow dependencies to happen. Then I'm going back to the Vishwamitra trip, no?
Yeah.
So I love to create a Trishanku Swarga for the students who come to me. That's very destructive. Or even worse, no? There are some teachers who end up doing the Shakuntala trip with people who come and learn from them. Yeah.
So, Rakhu, there is one last question, because it came repeatedly in the chat, and Anjitaji said we could take it. This is about tapas, the one you mentioned around that time. A lot of people are asking, how does one start the process of tapas, and is there any correlation between the process of tapas and one's immunity?
Yeah, of course there is. Yeah. Krishnamacharya would repeat, he says tapas first starts with food. It's a very interesting idea. Yeah. The way I understand it is that food and taste are the first forms of avidya. When I don't know the difference between something that tastes good and is really good for me in terms of swasthya, in terms of creating deep health, you start off with a problem. This is an analogy for everything in life, right? There are lots of things that are offered to us. Junk food, it is looked at it's tested. Millions of dollars are going into figuring out exactly how to make you addicted to bad food because it tastes good. So the first step of tapas is, how do I relate with food? And this has profound implications, because every part of me, if I can eat properly, I've already started on a process of being healthy. If I examine my relationship with food, it reveals a lot of things about me. Yeah, so food is a very important thing. And the more I eat really good food, obviously my immunity is going to go up, and so on. So the connection is very obvious. Even Facebook talks about this connection.
Okay.
And there can't be a greater truth than Facebook, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rakhuji, for sharing all these reflections and insights.
Thank you.
And because all the comments are highly appreciative, and there are a lot more questions. A lot of them are asking, can we learn Yoga Sutra with you, and a lot of other. I think we'll come to that after Anuradhaji's announcement.
Sure.
So thank you very much, Raghuji, for this wonderful session. You've left us with a lot of food for thought. We have been
Okay. Be
nourished.
careful. Don't get caught with the taste.
That's why we need to join your classes. So it's been a very, very nourishing session at various levels for everybody. And I think the success of the title of the talk, Antaranga Yoga, is the fact that we've had the maximum number of questions in this session. Also, in terms of speakers' speech time, this was one of the shortest. We've not had anyone doing less than 40 minutes, you know. So considering that was the case, we still have more than 35 questions. The participation was one of the highest so far. And so there's an outpouring of gratitude for this gift that you have given so many of us here. I just wanted to also mention to the audience that Raghuji, by training, was an engineer. So now that I'm teaching at an engineering institute, it's really wonderful to see how he has married the best of this empirical mind with the best of the spiritual wisdom. And I think that is because of the masters that he has had the privilege of working with. So I'm still to hear from you very secretly what was your experience with Krishnamacharya-ji? Yes. So with these words, thank you very much. I mean, we'll come back. Hariji will ask you more about how people can connect to you.
Okay.
Today was a very complete day in many respects because we started with asana in the morning, then we went on to pranayama in the afternoon, and now we've ended with Bahiranga Yoga. And that too presented in such a beautiful manner through stories and, you know, so for those of us who are going to bed, I'm sure we're going to have sweet dreams. For the Western part of the world, I think they're going to be inspired to have a very enlightened day. So again, thank you very much. I'd like to request Srinivasji to kindly put up the program for tomorrow's sessions. So anyway, here it keeps coming on. I don't know if I said by mistake Bahiranga. So what you took was
You said Bahiranga. That's okay.
Antaranga. I'm sorry. That was a slip. So if we ended with Antaranga, not the Bahiranga. Yes. Yes. So Srinivasji, could I kindly request you to put it up? Yes. So tomorrow we have a very special session in the morning, which becomes very relevant in today's times, especially when there's so much of fear and apprehension about one's well-being and the fear of death, the Abhinivesha aspect of the Yoga Sutras, the kleshas. So here we have in the morning a talk by Dr. Alok Pandey, who's a physician and psychiatrist at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Pondicherry. And he's going to be talking to us on the art of life and death. He has a book on death, dying and beyond. So we requested him to share with us about this whole relationship between how do we live life and how do we pass on graciously, let's say. And then we have Truptish, a very senior practitioner of Hatha Yoga, and he's the founder, director of a new kind of yoga that he's presenting to us called Oil Yoga. He's going to be speaking on Vinyasa for All. And at night, we have another very fascinating session by Dr. Frederick Travis, who's the director for Brain Consciousness and Cognition at the Maharshi International University. And he's going to be talking to us on meditation, yoga, and the brain. So he works very closely on seeing the impact of all these yogic practices on the brain. So that's another dimension that we wanted to add to this festival, that it's not only about the philosophy, the theory of it, there is also the practice part of it, there is also the research aspect, which is very important in this. And Raghuji is also playing a very pioneering role in trying to highlight the contributions of the Indic thought paradigms in the fields of psychology, which then will invite many more participants to do research on. So that's going to be the sessions for tomorrow. So please come and join the programs because we really have some stellar experts. We've had some fantastic speakers. I think more than anything else, it's a fact of the truth of their experience. So allow yourselves to be touched by the power of their personal journeys. And I think that will be an inspiration for many of you here. So thank you very much. I just wanted to make another small announcement for our audience is that we request each one of you to become an ambassador of this Global Festival of Yoga and reach out the message about these sessions, about these wonderful teachers that we have to all your friends, to all your networks, for the simple reason that this is a great chance to interact personally with them. I think that's a very special opportunity that is being provided by this global festival. And the idea is that we will collectively celebrate our wellness. In a time like this, generating more energy on that front is going to be practically ensure our good health and survival through this crisis. So with these words, Hariji, I allow you to continue asking questions to Raghuji. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha-ji. So, Raghuji, there are a lot of questions around how to reach you and whether you teach Yoga Sutra. So, a lot of people seems to have shown interest in that. So, what is the best way to reach you?
I guess one is to write to us, na? And maybe you can type it out, Hari, Ashram, yeah, www, yeah, just give the ID, na?
Yeah.
And you write ashram at Ritambhara, spelt with a T, RITAMBHARA.org.in. And say attention Raghu, and I will get it and I will respond to it. Yeah. So you can be on our mailing list. That's the first thing. Actually, what's happened is that almost for a couple of years, because there are so many students of ours coming from all over India, we have been working with this medium for, I think, almost 2 years now, Hari.
Yeah, 2.5 years.
So we have developed a whole range of work. The Mahabharata immersion that Hari talked about is the central piece, because then you really work with yourself. And the film that we saw is very much like the Mahabharata immersion. Yeah, except that you may not be such a trained dancer, but you'll dance the same process of Durga and yourself or whatever, and you'll have the same enjoyment in the dancing. I promise you that. And the catharsis and the transformative experience of this. But we also do a lot of other programs. Like I had done a 6-day seminar on the essential parts of the Yoga Sutra, which is the 70 odd sutras, and how it refers to inner work. Now that has got recorded, and we've, one of my friends has cut it into 20-minute pieces. So we are using that as a way of distance learning about the Yoga Sutra, fundamentally looking at how Yoga Sutra is inner work. And that's something you could look at. That's a good start if you want to look at this. We're also looking at some simpler programs. There's another program that I've developed called the Saptaswara, which is a very simple, very accessible, very pragmatic way of looking at chakras. There's a lot of confusion and conflation and all of this around this word of the chakra thing. There are very simple, very pragmatic ways, everyday ways of working with it. So we've developed a very simple program, and it's got all the elements of what we do, but it's a very simple, accessible program. And we also have a number of other similar things which are initial, like Kaya Madhya Sutra. And my wife has studied Vastu Shastra for many, many years. So we do something called the Sacred Quest, understanding the inner space and outer space, how to look at a temple. What does it mean to go into a temple and understand the inside and the outside of the temple, right? And then we also have detailed Yoga Sutra where I'm just going to start one of these now, which is sutra by sutra, detailed meanings, and so on. But I would like to keep that open only for people who've already understood a little bit, like going through the Antaranga Sadhana process, going through the inner work through yoga process and things like that, because I'm not looking at the sutras in a traditional way. I'm not looking at it as word by word meaning and panditya. And one of the sutras actually makes fun of people with panditya. So you cannot do that with the Yoga Sutra, can you? So yeah, so that's the range of programs that we have. And we have a fairly well-designed website which gives you the details of all of this.
Yes.
Yeah, and as soon as COVID allows us, we're waiting to conduct the Mahabharata immersion, right? And it's as important for me to conduct it as it is for people to come there, because every time we go through a Mahabharata immersion, I'm sure I learn much more than all the 20, 25 people who come there. And I just really enjoy the process. So I'm very happy to do it whenever people want me to do it, kind of a thing, because I'm going to gain a lot. And it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Thanks.
And what they say about dance is that when you perform a really good dance, the feeling at the end of it is madhuram. Even if you've experienced anger, if you've experienced fear, like the dance that we just saw, there's anger, there's fear, there's a navarasa was there. But if you really experience it fully, what is left behind is madhuram. So I experience madhuram when we do Mahabharata immersion. So I'm quite happy to do it.
Now I was saying that sweetness, madhuram.
Yeah, madhuram, sweetness. Yes, the sweetness doesn't capture madhuram, Anu. No. You'll have to help out with your Sanskrit and tell us what is the equivalent word that will capture madhuram.
Sweetness.
The essence of sweetness maybe is madhuram.
Just responding to one comment in the chat box, considering the pandemic situation, are there any of these online programs? So just
there are, no?
Yeah, so
Saptasvara is an online program.
Sacred Quest.
Sacred Quest is an online program.
And the Inner Work Through Yoga, which Raghu mentioned.
Inner Work Through Yoga is an online program.
So you can see the website, you can see all the list to see.
All right, so I'll take over. I just had an idea when I was listening to Raghuji that each one of you here has been lit up by this idea, by these teachings that he has shared with us. So we request you to, because this platform that we are on can host at least 1,000 people for every teacher. So we are asking for your help to at least light 10 more candles. Each we have at least 100 participants per session. So each one can light and keep that candle lit. Not just lighting, but keep that candle lit for the rest of the festival. Then I think we will have a lot more light on the whole, on this world in these dark times. So with these words, Raghuji, a last message, and then we close. We let everybody take the leave also.
The last message. Okay, every morning when you look at the mirror, think about Virochana and Indra. And hopefully start looking inward, and every event in your life is a mirror. Every moment can be a mirror. So have fun, enjoy life. What else?
That's a lot.
COVID will come and COVID will go.
So thank you very much. We'll end on that positive note. So take care of yourselves, be safe, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. All the videos will be available on Indica Yoga platforms, indicayoga.com, Indica Yoga Facebook page, Indica Yoga YouTube channel. All the videos thus far have been uploaded thanks to our brilliant technical support team, Srinivas ji and Koti Ramprasad ji. So please log on, listen to these lectures. They are lectures that can be heard again and again. So do make the most of them. And like I said, we look forward to your contribution to adding to the light. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last thing is that Truptish Ji's is a practical session. It's not a talk on Vinyasa for all. So thank you all and stay with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hariji.